my way to you. Pull up on that ass like, ooh, I wanna take you to New York, Chicago, LA, Houston, down all over London, Paris, the A, the Bay, everywhere. I'll take you downtown, yeah. Show you all the finer things in life. Things in life, I wanna take you down. Ooh. I wanna take you down. Ooh. I wanna take you down. Show you all the finer things in life. I wanna take you down. Show you all the finer things in life.
Lake Shore, I made sure to make sure, yeah, that my place yours, yeah, 28th floor, yeah, I had 8 thoughts, yeah, all 8 yours, yeah, cake for dessert, but I ate yours.
I wanna take you to New York, Chicago, LA, Houston, down all over London, Paris, the A, the Bay, everywhere, fly all over. Your last boy couldn't get what you asked for. Your last boy didn't even know. I'm gonna take you downtown, and show you all the finer things in life. I wanna take you downtown, show you all the finer things in life. Things in life, I wanna take you downtown, and show you all the finer things in life.
Good morning. You are tuned in to I Do, I Did, I Don't on What's in It for the Black People Media. This is Tasha Napper here, ready to have another good conversation with you about divorce, about marriage, about parenting, about all of it, everything that goes along with the I do, I did, I don't name. So welcome. I'm glad to have you here. We've had some really great conversations over the past 4 or 5 weeks now when we've talked to several guests. Today you just have me, no guests. We're going to talk. And I really want to talk about the children. I want to talk about the kids because as we, first of all, let me pause and say, if you're tuned in, I want you to make sure that you like the broadcast. I want to make sure that you share it, both the page for I Do, I Did, I Don't, and for What's in It for the Black People Media. Make sure that you are following because then you'll get notifications when shows like this one show up. So let's talk about the kids. Let's talk about what happens in divorce with kids. I think we have all seen these very interesting, really very bleak statistics related to children and divorce. And a lot of times you hear that reason for not moving forward with divorce is the kids. And that there'll be a negative impact on the kids. What about the kids? What do we've all heard that. We talk about it. And I found some statistics and really looking for some credible information. This is from a clinical professor of pediatrics at the University of California, San Francisco. So I want to talk through some of the statistics that she included in her abstract related to divorce and children. And what's interesting here is I think we all have heard all the negative statistics, right? And so let me just go through a few of them because I want to get your take on this today. I want to have a conversation today about this. Essentially, this basically says children of divorce have a lot of negative consequences that are associated with it. And so you hear things like, even though there are a lot of differences in the marriage relationships, right there, let's just acknowledge that there are a lot of differences in how children are living and moving in these marriages that are dysfunctional or not working out as well that lead to divorce. But despite all of these differences, this research says divorce has been shown to diminish a child's future competence in all areas of life, including family relationships, education, emotional well-being, and future earning power. And so when I hear that, what about the kids, comes up, and it makes a lot of sense that we would think about it that way, right? And is this the right decision for the kids? Even though I may not have a great time in this relationship, it may not be serving me well, but is it going to impact my children more negatively than it's impacting me currently? And so there's some weight given to that, right? And what do you do moving forward, given that most research says there's a ton of negative consequences that the children will experience as the result of a divorce? And so, I want to go through some of what these things are saying, what I've read here in terms of these negative consequences. So one of the things says, basically these negative outcomes can persist into adulthood. And though the difference between kind of intact and non-intact families is a small one, the children are going to be adversely affected for a long term. And so you hear things like the child may lose time with each parent. Well, obviously that's going to happen if it's a divorce situation, but that can have a negative impact on them, right? The parents have to adjust to their own losses as a divorced parent, but the children are also losing time with that parent. Now, some might argue that they have as much time with that parent to start with, wasn't really that, because in some cases they actually gain more time, right? What else here? There is the child may lose economic security. So a really big one. And we know that before, most women really considered this because they just did not have the same earning power as their spouses. So a lot of times their decision to leave or stay was related to the economic situation that they would experience. And so a lot of mothers will experience, probably the loss of 20 to 25, 50% these days, since we have more working parents in both situations. But, before, with our prior generations, they may lose 100% of earning power because maybe they were a stay-at-home parent, and that weighs a lot on whether they decide to move forward with a divorce. And so if they're suffering because they don't have the earning power, then obviously the children are going to suffer. And, that when we think about what was the median income of women, single mother households after divorce, it's usually about half of what it was before, which is a pretty bleak picture, especially if you think about you already were just getting by. You weren't living in the lap of luxury. So that's something to really consider, right? The child's loss of economic security. So a couple other things that are here in this, that the child may also lose emotional security. And we've talked about that quite a bit, in just the impact of working through your own emotions and being able to show up for your children if you are experiencing a loss and a great deal of turmoil emotionally while you're going through a divorce. And so the child also, if you think about children, they are not yet emotionally mature enough to figure out how to handle the big emotions that come with a divorce. So they're trying to figure out how to navigate this, and they're not less skilled at doing so. And so, their relationships with each parent will suffer as a result of that. And their relationships with others outside of those relationships will also have an impact, a negative impact, because now they may not be spending the same amount of time with family on both sides, both maternal and paternal part of the family. And so, you think about things that could change, like where they live and the friends that they're associated with or that they have, and now where they're going to school. There's a lot of upheaval that could happen for the children in the situation of divorce. All right, so those three reasons we walk through, they lose time with each parent, they lose economic security, they lose emotional security, and then a couple more, the child may have decreased social and psychological maturation. So what's interesting here that I found is I tend to think about divorce in younger children just because statistically most divorces occur kind of within that first 15 years or so. And usually the children are younger. But this actually brings out a really good point. And it says that college students, children of divorced parents, or college students likely experience some issues as well. They experience things like verbal aggression and violence, and that carries over into their relationships with their partners and how they interact with them. So really interesting that, social and psychological maturation, because of course the children then are going to experience some anxiety and some depression, and they worsen after an event like a divorce because it shakes the entire foundation for that child. Everything they knew to be true, everything that was really stable is no longer that way. And they're trying to find their balance again. They're trying to find their footing and understand, okay, what is this world now that everything I knew as a world has changed? And so they can have a higher risk of emotional distress as a result of that. And lots of statistics here around what that means and, what the children experience. But basically, based on what we've talked about in the impact of divorce from a child's point of view, we could see how there could be a lot of these negative effects happening, right? And so I'm wondering about things like like Kim and Kanye right now, right? They're getting divorced. Kim is filed officially with the bigwig attorney, and she said basically, I want this to be, amicable. And so should she stay for the kids? They've got 4 kids in 10 years. Based on all the things that we just talked about, does it make more sense for her to stay? I don't know. What do you think? Because her kids are definitely going to experience some emotional distress. They'll probably lose time with their dad and with her, especially if she said, we want to share custody. So we want to make sure that, the kids are seeing both. That actually might be a better deal for Kim because she gets a little break sometimes. But, should she stay? I think a lot of the advice that we would have gotten from elders would say, oh, yeah, you should stay for the kids because of all these negative things that we just talked about. And so, yeah, while there's the effect on the kids, there's also going to be the effects on the parents too, right? Because you're dealing with a loss. You're dealing with a huge change and shift, and you're grieving, and you're going through a forgiveness process. So, there's a lot to think about and to work out there. I'm sure some of that stuff she thought about, but is it better because there's money? Because she has money, is it better and she doesn't need to stay or have to stay as a result? Kind of wondering about that. So, we think about sort of how we move through these decisions. They're very complex decisions as we're trying to figure out, do we move forward with a divorce or not? And what is the impact on the children? And there are so many impacts. There are so many things to consider and think about when we talk about moving forward with a divorce. And so much of this says that there are so many negative consequences that I wonder, why would we choose to do it? If the consequences are this dire on children, then why would we decide to get a divorce in the first place? I don't know. It makes it really interesting. And, it really makes me think about what are we assigning to our children when we walk that path. Now, I'm not advocating one way or the other necessarily. I'm just pulling information and having us consider that information. Because I remember several conversations with friends of mine who would say things like, it was very clear the relationships were not working well at all and had not been working well for a long period of time. But the discussion was, well, we need to stay together for the kids, and I'll just sort of self-sacrifice and suffer for the majority of the time. And that's honorable. If you're a parent, that's an honorable thing because you want to make sure that your children are well. But my question usually was, well, the children probably know and sense what's going on because they can only make sense of their surroundings in many cases based on what their intuition and what they're feeling and what they're seeing, because they don't always have the emotional intelligence to really decipher what's happening. But they know, they feel it, they know. And so is it really in the best interest of the child to stay together when they're seeing the dysfunction? What if that dysfunction is more harmful to the child than staying together? How do we, are we considering that or thinking about that in the longer term? And so, after looking at a lot of this research and thinking through this, I went, well, what happens? And this is years and years and years of research compiled, okay? Credible sources, Academy of Pediatrics, very credible stuff. But what happens if we find that a lot of the issues that are happening in marriage are the cause of the issues that the children have as opposed to the divorce itself? So while they're correlated, they're not necessarily the cause of, meaning divorce and some of these issues with children can be happening at the same time and correlated, but does it mean that the divorce is the cause of all the emotional distress? Yes, the divorce may be the cause of some of the financial issues because you don't have the same earning power, but everything that we just walked through here, things like the child losing some of their academic stimulation, the child having less interaction with friends or emotional security or decreased social and psychological maturation. I'm just kind of wondering what happens, and they're having this emotional distress. Is the divorce the cause of that, or could it have been the things that happened in the marriage that are requiring that? Or not requiring that are creating that situation? Because I think lots of teachers would say, yeah, we see a lot of kids that have some issues in school, and they're in two-parent households, and that may be a huge part of the concern and the issues that are happening. So it's just interesting. It's interesting to think about this from that standpoint of the kids. When I think about myself and how I was making the decision, for me, I thought the children are going to be impacted either way. One way or the other, there's a negative impact to them, right? There's a negative impact if I stay because they're going to see some very dysfunctional things because I'm not one that can stuff that and hide that and not, what you see is what you get. I am going to respond to the situation as it feels and as it is. And so I'm not going to be able to quote unquote hide that from the kids, which I don't think we hide very well anyway. We think we do, the kids know. So that was one part of the consideration for me. The second part was, well, yeah, I could stay and I could be the person that's suffering, but is that going to be good for my children to see that? They will have a mom that's not very healthy, that they clearly see is suffering, depressed, and how does that impact them in the future? And so I've prioritized, this is my own personal decision, I prioritized making sure that they had a healthy mom so that they could be healthy. And would there be issues with that? Yep, there would be issues either way, deciding to stay or deciding to leave. But I chose to be healthy, to present a healthier mom for them so that they had a better experience growing up and hopefully a better shot at being healthy children and well-adjusted. Now, that meant right away getting them into therapy, making sure that we are working through a lot of the things that meant not making sure they had time with their dad, making sure that they had the time with me, that they were spending time with the broader part of their family. So it was important to me that I was well. But I think for some people, it's also important that they self-sacrifice and that they make sure that they're more willing to do that because they think that the consequences to the children are much more dire than the consequences to them personally. But again, I argue, could there be negative consequences that way too? And could they be even more impactful? You know, I have several friends who were college students, and when they went away to college, their parents divorced. And the parents get kind of held on all this time, right? They were holding on, waiting for the kids to get to 18, raise the kids out of the house. Now they get divorced. And I don't think that situation was without major impact to those adults now who are in college, because now their world shook in a whole different way. They're adults, but they're in college navigating and trying to figure out their own life. And now the rug is pulled out from under them. Now they are 18 and not on solid ground and trying to navigate college at the same time, while they are also experimenting, having their own relationships, and just unraveling at the same time. And that didn't go well for them either. So I'm sure we can see things on both sides, you know, situations where it went well. But one really small thing that really stood out to me was some of the college students thought, well, now when I go home, where do I go to? Do I go to mom's house? Do I go to dad's house? I don't have a room anymore? You know, that was a really big thing for a lot of the college students whose parents waited it out until they were older and before they made a decision to separate, to divorce. And so I think there's a lot to consider, and these are heavy decisions that we should not take lightly. And I do not believe that we should judge one person's decision versus another person's decision. I think everybody gets there in their own time and what is the right decision for them and their family, because the situations are so different. The people involved are so different. The finances, all of those things have to be considered. But you can't judge your decision, your choice, and sort of project that to someone else and say this is what they should do, because every marriage is not the same and every divorce is not going to be the same either. Every child is not the same. So, you know, I'm still interested in what happens when you are a family of means. You have the money. You don't have to worry about that piece. You're just worried about the emotional stability of the children. Then do you decide, I'm going to go ahead and do this because I have the money to pay for, I can pay for their therapy, you know, or I know they're not going to be financially insecure, and I have a way to make sure that they have all these other things available to them in order to have a better life experience. Just wondering what your thoughts are too. So let's see here. What was the other? There was something else that I had on this list that talked about, you know, a big one to me, which was the child may change his or her outlook on sexual behavior. What does that mean? What does that mean? So it means that there's an increased approval by children of divorced parents of things like premarital sex, cohabitation, and divorce. There tends to be an earlier sexual debut. Girls whose fathers left the home before they were 5 years old were 8 times more likely to become pregnant as adolescents than girls from intact families. Boys, on the other hand, similarly, do have earlier sexual debut and higher rates of sexual STDs, basically, when they have experienced divorce in their family. So it's interesting to me that these impacts are so widespread. And another one, the children of divorced parents are less likely to view marriage as permanent and less likely to view it as a lifelong commitment. So they're more willing to they have sexual experiences earlier. They're more willing to cohabitate. they are generally, their parents also, because they've experienced this, tend to be more accepting of some of those things as well. And so, I heard last week, Mikal Harris, who's a licensed clinical professional counselor, he made a statement, and we didn't dive into this a whole lot, but he said, my mom raised me to really date around. He said this will sound interesting, but she didn't raise him in a way that was like, find one person, attached to that one person. It was have a lot of experiences in order to figure out where you land and what's the right decision for you in terms of committing to someone. And it sounds like in some way that's what this article is saying, that sometimes there's this more willingness to have their kids give them more permission to be open to experiences so that they don't make bad decisions. And it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense to me. And what Mikal's mom told him basically, or sort of guided him, was make sure that you are really experiencing life. Have fun. Go out, date until you find what you like, what you want, what you don't want. Have those experiences. It's kind of like going to college and not declaring your major yet while you experience some things and figure out what you want to do. And so I could see that happening here, or at least the connection here between that statement that was made, which I don't think it was a bad statement at all. He did say, it will sound kind of weird, but I don't think that was a bad statement. I think a lot of us wish that we had taken more time to explore and experiment and date before we made a permanent choice in a spouse. So you are watching I Do, I Did, I Don't on What's in It for the Black People Media. We are going to take a break and come back and continue this conversation about children and divorce. Do you stay? Do you go? What about the kids? That generally is the question that comes up. So we'll see you on the other side of the break.
WIFTBPN.
Church Chicago's Power Hour. I'm your host, Angie Mims, and
Terrence Key, TD, a.k.a. Terrence Daniels.
I wish I had one witness in the house.
You got one. You got a couple of them. Got two T's.
Give me a testimony.
Oh, Lord. He's did it before. Oh, Lord.
I got one. Something better. I got 5 reasons.
5 reasons. Oh, Lord. He turned it around.
Turn it around. He woke me up this morning.
Oh. Don't do this. Don't do this.
Go
number
ahead.
4?
He woke me up this morning.
Come on, number 3. Come.
He woke me up.
Oh, Lord.
He woke you up.
That thing can touch you.
I'm
One
telling
of
you.
them 5s will get you. What's the second one?
He woke me up this morning.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh my God.
And the number 1 reason,
Number 1. Final answer.
he woke me up
He
this
woke
morning.
me up this
He
morning.
woke me up this morning.
That's a testimony.
That's a
Turn that thing
testimony.
Loving you has always been easy because it's true. Yeah. I wouldn't have believed if someone would have told me you would come along to reveal my soul. 'Cause I was done with love, my heart had grown cold. You had good energy, exactly what I needed. You walked in my life and placed the joy where was needed. Now mirage what I feel for you. Put that on God, girl, I'm loving you. Said it's easy. It's easy to love. Easy to love. Said it's easy. It's easy to love. Easy to love. been wonderful, wonderful, more than you'll ever know. We got good chemistry, go together like love says. Passion and care we show one another, tops all the rest.
All right, welcome back to I Do, I Did, I Don't on What's in It for the Black People Media. This is Tasha here, and we are talking about the kids. What about the kids? So I want you to take a moment to like, to share, and to comment even. We're talking about the kids and want to understand, what happens to the children in divorce. What should we expect? We hear all these negative consequences that can be a result. On the first half, I was talking to you about a lot of the research that says basically, after a decade of review of research, that there are many, many negative consequences to children of divorce. What I didn't hear was a lot of things that were positive. And so, I heard things like the children may lose time with each parent. They may lose financial stability because earning power of one parent is not the same as two parents. They may lose cognitive and academic stimulation. They might be less physically healthy. They could have a higher risk of emotional distress and a higher risk of emotional security. They may lose emotional security and decrease social and psychological maturation. So all of those are pretty darn bleak reasons or outcomes for children. And they make us think, well, then do we divorce? If it's going to be this bad for the kids, does it make sense to move forward in divorce? So with all of that said, I started to wonder, well, are these really the thing? Because they may be correlated, these two things are happening at the same time about the kids having a negative experience as a result of divorce. But could it be that those negative experiences and outcomes for children were happening prior to in a dysfunctional marriage situation that then just become more obvious in divorce? And so I found some additional research that says that a lot more recent studies actually say that the impact of divorce on children have found that many of the psychological symptoms seen in children of divorce can be accounted for in the years before divorce. So this past decade or so, there have been a lot more studies and a large increase in the number of studies about the complex variables related to the things that we're looking at in children related to divorce and the negative impact, right? So, yeah, it may not be that the divorce is the cause of these things that it's highlighted, but one thing that has come out of this research is that children are not doomed, first of all, because of divorce. I want to make sure that I say that again. The children are not doomed because they are the product of a divorce. What we do see, however, is that children who are from a divorced household tend to have more access to things like therapy because there is this realization that they will need that in order to cope with such a big change in life. And I kind of wonder if children having this experience of divorce, who then have to learn how to cope through life with something that happens like this, are they better prepared? Are they better prepared for it than someone who may not experience it later? I don't know. But more and more of the research says that the issues are not necessarily because of the divorce, but because of the dysfunction that's happening prior to a divorce. And so, parents might be working on it. They may be going through therapy. They may, for their marriage. A lot of times, though, they're worried about saving the marriage, not necessarily worried about helping the children. And so the children are not getting access to that. But then once the divorce happens, it's more clear that the children need to have support differently. And so those children actually do have a better chance of having therapeutic intervention in order to help support them. And this new research is actually showing that it's documenting the negative effects of troubled marriages on children. So not just divorce, but what is happening before you get to a divorce, because kids can see a lot of things, right? You know, my parents' relationship was very toxic. It was not good at all. And when they separated, I remember waking up one morning. It was my birthday. I had turned 5 years old. And I remember thinking, I'm 5 today, and they're not together, and this is a really good thing. Because I was well aware of how difficult, just how toxic the household was. How they did not need to be together. That was very clear to me as a 5-year-old. And so, imagine what children experience prior to getting to the decision to divorce, because they're seeing all this dysfunction, all this negative. You know, whether it could be that you're arguing, it could be that, you know, somebody's there, not there, whatever it is. In many cases, even fighting, not healthy for the children. And the cause of then their emotional distress is not the divorce, but everything that was happening before in the marriage. And so I asked the question earlier about whether it's better for the children to have, in my case, I'd rather my children have a healthy mom and not see some of the negative things that are going to happen if I choose to stay and this relationship doesn't work, because it's I can't hide how I feel. So is that a better situation? And I see, you know, some folks saying, yeah, it was a better situation. I felt better when the parents split, because, you know, as children, again, the children know that things aren't right. They may not be able to voice it. They may not be able to articulate well what the problem is. But prior to having all of the emotional intelligence, all of the words to really explain what they're seeing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, they internalize that, and they have to move by intuition to try to figure out what's happening here. And this feels like this is not the right move, or that. So I think a lot of times we're kidding ourselves when we think that the kids don't know and that we're hiding it well, because we're not. We're not. And I bet a lot of you how many of you talked to your kids afterwards and they were like, well, I kind of thought this might happen, or, you know, yeah, that's probably a good thing. Or I'm glad that you made that decision. Or had some experiences that they may not have even shared with you about how they were experiencing the marriage or even one of the parents. And so, you know, we want to, I think, so is what about the kids our excuse? Is that our reason to stay because we're not prepared yet or ready yet to make the difficult decision? In some cases, maybe so. I think it might be in many cases. But I do think that there are cases that it might make sense to stay because the impact to the child is so great. You may understand, you know, if you've got a kid that's already having serious issues and you know that a divorce thrown into that mix is just going to unravel that child, yeah, it might make sense to stay. And in other cases, if, you know, your child is pretty well adjusted and, you know, you think doing well and you think that children are resilient. They can get over it. They can, I won't say get over it. They can move through it and they can get to a better place. But if you know that your child is one that's just super, super not going to have a good time because there are real serious issues, and I'm talking diagnosed issues, not I'm going to tell myself that my child is going to have a hard time so that I don't have to make this decision. Because I think we do that a lot of times. And it becomes, well, what about the kids? Because we've heard all this negative stuff, but many of you probably grew up in households where the relationship wasn't good, and that impacted you negatively as you thought about your picture of what a healthy marriage is. As you're trying to create now that healthy marriage in your family, but you saw your dad not come home, and now you think that's okay in your relationship, or you saw your mom flirting with other people, let's say, whatever that is, you saw that as somewhat normal. Well, it's not. And so now your picture of what a healthy marriage should look like is skewed also, because you're thinking this is okay. This is what happened in my parents' household, and they stayed together. So why is she tripping because I didn't come back home? Or, why is he tripping because I made eyes at another dude? Or, it's just, it gets to be real interesting to me when we think about what those right decisions are. And I don't think that, like I said, I don't think you can judge one versus the other. But I do think that children of divorce are not doomed. They will have a major life crisis that they will have to work through. But I don't think that's exclusive to children of divorce. Other children will have those experiences as well. If you were in a household that's really dysfunctional, and let's say there's domestic abuse occurring, you're going to have a severe emotional crisis as well as a child and need to work through that. Whether your parents stay together or divorce, either way, you're going to have that issue as a child, and you're going to need the support to work through it. So all of these reports that talk about divorce diminishing a child's future competence in all areas of life, basically, I'm going to say I think it's hogwash. Does some things happen? Yes. Does it happen also for children who are in families that are dysfunctional? Absolutely. And so much of the new research says that for parents who are divorcing, that the divorce itself is not the cause, but the issues in the marriage tend to be the causes of some of the children's issues. So, what do y'all think? What do y'all think? I asked the question, we talking about right now in the news, Kim and Kanye. Should Kim stay? Because they got 4 kids. And all these negative things are going to impact their kids too, aren't they? So what's the right decision? It's a tough one, right? It's tough. It's tough to know. So I will say that while children of divorced parents do have, as a group, they may have more adjustment problems than do children of marriages that stayed together, stayed intact, never divorced parents. The view that divorce per se is the major cause of these symptoms has to be reconsidered. And it's being reconsidered currently in light of a lot of new research that is documenting that the negative effects of troubled marriages on children has more to do with the issues that children are experiencing than the divorce itself. So that's an interesting one. I do want to spend some time with some professionals, and I hope to have a guest on the show who's going to walk us through and talk about what do they see? What are the issues that they see with the children? What contributes to that? Do they see it as a divorce? Do they see it as issues in the marriage prior to the divorce that have created some of the problems? And then the impact afterwards. I would love to have someone on the show so that we can talk about that even more. What about the kids? Because it tends to be a really big reason why we stay. And I would say sometimes it's even a cop-out on why we won't make the decisions that we need to make one way or the other is because, well, it's the kids. It's the kids. So before in life, let me say it this way. Before generations earlier, when you think about our parents and their parents and how the divorce process worked, it was no fault is relatively new. So this whole concept of a no-fault divorce, which meant that before there were reasons given for the divorce, not just, okay, we're getting divorced, we're splitting, and it doesn't matter why. And so it became a process that was a lot more costly as you were going through the legal process. And honestly, the no-fault divorce, the whole point of it was to try to move the process along faster and to do so in a way that cost the two parties less money. Pros and cons of both sides. People see it in different ways, but that was really the whole point. So before, it could be really, really costly for people walking through a divorce when it was there was fault involved and it wasn't a no fault divorce, and people would just decide, don't want to do it. Just the negative impacts to kids. It's going to be really costly. I'm going to struggle with this dysfunction until we're done. But what that also meant is some of the worst divorces, some of the worst situations that kids could be in were the cases that made it to divorce, right? So if you think back, so I'm putting on my nerd hat right now and thinking statistically. So if you think back to all of the studies that were done earlier, were done on some of the worst cases because these were the ones that made it to court and actually to divorce. And so those children were in some pretty dysfunctional environments. And we know that children who are removed from the most dysfunctional environments are going to be more likely to do better after divorce. But we see this research sort of saying that wasn't the case. And that's largely because a lot of these marriages were they were often very difficult, expensive to go through. And so it was really those most dysfunctional marriages that ended in divorce. But now you've got no fault divorce. So probably happens, the rates may be higher. I think it's actually come down a little bit in the U.S., but that's also moderated because a lot of people are choosing not to get married. But that's a sidebar. So it's likely that, a child in these cases now in no fault divorce has not experienced the severe levels of parental discord. Parents might just decide this isn't working and proceed to divorce in a different way than before. It had to be so severe because it was so costly and there had to be fault involved. Now with no fault, people may not have such dysfunctional relationships or marriages that the children are witnessing that impact them so negatively. And so the divorce can potentially have more adverse effects on the child. But at least in the sense that they didn't recognize that anything was necessarily wrong before the divorce happened. And I do think that was the case for my children who did not, they had never heard us raise our voices at each other. And so for them, it was a huge just what's happening here. Everything I knew, that was foundational for me is no longer. And so, could they have more adverse impacts? Absolutely. But we also know that children who are experiencing divorce tend to have more access to therapy. And so, it's they may not have had an extended period of parental conflict like I did as a kid, when I could tell that these two people do not need to be together in any shape, form, or fashion. This is unhealthy. It is toxic. I couldn't say it in those words, but as a kid, I knew that in my heart, right? So my children didn't have that same experience because they didn't see this very toxic, unhealthy relationship. But when we split, they were just kind of floored by what is happening, what's going on, and immediately got into therapy so that we could start working through that. And it's been extremely, extremely beneficial for us. And I personally think that it's important for everybody to have their own personal therapist, including the kids, because they're going through a lot. This is outside of divorce. This is just normal life. You need to have a therapist on deck that you have a relationship with. You need one, your spouse needs one, you need a marriage therapist together, and your kids also need that, because we're going to walk, what's sure is we're going to walk through experiences in life where we're going to need to have that support. And so we need to have that person in our within our network of care. So like you have your normal doctor that you go to you have the specialist that you see. Got to have that therapist on deck. That's my personal thought. So we had a relationship with a therapist for the children even prior to being separated and going through a divorce. So, yeah, I don't think your kids are doomed. I think that they are, kids are resilient, but they're not resilient without help and without competent help and without attention to be able to address the issues that are unique to them that they are experiencing in divorce, and without having the support that's required, because as a parent, you're going to need that support too. And you're working through your own emotions, and you don't have all the emotional space and energy to give to the child who's also working through theirs. And so, you're working through things together. Both parents are. The children will need support. And if they have that, then they really can be better on the other side of divorce. They do not have to have these negative outcomes that we keep hearing about, that we're used to hearing all the statistics. And I hear people say things like, well, I don't want my kids to be a statistic. The reality is everybody's a statistic anyway. Maybe you don't want it to be a negative statistic, but you're going to be, everybody's a statistic of some sort. But you can counter a lot of these negative impacts that happen to children of divorce. It doesn't have to be that they are resigned to a life of negative experiences because their parents walked through divorce. It may be, in some cases, the most healthy thing that you can do for yourself and for the children. Again, not advocating divorce here. I still believe in marriage. I think that it can work. You have to have two people working on it and working hard on it in order to make it work. And you have to have two people that are committed to doing that. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like we can get beyond that, and our children can thrive and be better even in a situation like that. It does not have to be that they are. And when we approach divorce with that orientation, I think it's easier for those outcomes to be true, right? So we're thinking and believing and saying they're going to have all these negative experiences as a result of divorce. I think we have to talk about that differently and think about that differently and speak what we want it to be. If we want our children to be healthy and well adjusted and emotionally stable and able to set good boundaries because they have seen those things, we got to say that. We have to say that, because what we believe in our heart is going to come out of our mouths, and it's going to come out in our actions. And so we have to take the responsibility to make sure that we are speaking life into them and not death into them, because we think that they're not going to do as well in school, they're not going to have good relationships. A lot of us are products of divorce. A lot of us. And a lot of us are doing just fine. Some of us have issues. Clearly. Some have issues. But we can work on those things, right? So when we hear statistics like 20% of divorced children are going to have academic problems, the other side of that is 80% are not, right? So I want you all to think about this and reframe just a little bit sometimes on the statistics that we hear, because I read through a whole bunch of negative things, right? Let's say 20% I'm using them. Oh, even if we say 40%, 40% of kids are going to be emotionally damaged. I'm going to say it that way. But that means 60% are not. So sometimes we have to reframe our thinking also when we're looking at these numbers and thinking about these things to say, okay, there can be some negative impact, but there can be some positive. There's more likely to be a positive impact as well. So I want you guys to just think about that, to know that your children can be well. I want you to speak life into them so that they are doing well. And I want you to look at these statistics a little bit differently from both the positive and the negative side, so that you know and believe in your heart, and that comes out in what you say and what you do as you are interacting with your children, especially if you are making the decision to divorce or if you're making the decision to stay. If the decision is yours, either way, your children can be well. They can be well on the other side of this, and you also can be well on the other side of this. you all can thrive in the midst of a divorce. And I want you to do that. And so at some point, hopefully in the month of March, I will have someone on and we're going to talk to a therapist about children and their experience of divorce. We will talk through the tools that are available to help the children to walk through that. And honestly, what the parents need, because it may be that the kids are okay, but it's the parents that are that are creating the issues because of their disagreements and things like that. So I'm looking forward to those discussions and having you better equipped to walk through and manage through whatever your situation is. This is all about making sure that you can thrive, that you have the tools to do well, so that you can be better emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, and financially on the other side of a divorce. So again, it's been great to talk to you. This is Tasha on the I Do, I Did, I Don't on What's in It for the Black People Media. Again, I want to make sure that you are sharing the page, that you are also sharing What's in It for the Black People Media, so that folks are getting notifications when we're on air. And then share it. We know people that are getting divorced. Share the information with them so that they can go back and look at this a little bit later if they can't catch it live at 8 o'clock. Again, I Do, I Did, I Don't. What's in It for the Black People Media. You guys have a wonderful Sunday. It's been good to talk with you, and you can be better on the other side.
My soul, 'cause I was low in love, my heart had grown cold. You had good energy, exactly what I needed. You walked in my life and placed the joy where was needed. Now mirage what I feel for you. Put that on God, girl, I'm loving you. Said it's easy, it's easy to love, easy to love. Said it's easy to love, easy to love. Oh yeah. Loving you has always been easy, 'cause you're beautiful. Loving you has always been wonderful, more than you'll ever know. We got good chemistry, go together like love says. Passion and care, we show one another top stars. The feelings I have for you, I ain't felt in so long. What we share together, baby, the bond is so strong. It's no facade or whatever.